All right, so our workshop this morning is entitled Resume Essentials. And we are honored to have Abigail Noreika with us, who is the ECE Program Manager at Goodwill. So welcome, Abigail. And I'm going to go ahead and hand this workshop over to you now.
Great. Well, thank you all for having me. As Grace mentioned, I am the ECE Program Manager at Goodwill Industries of the Columbia Willamette. ECE stands for Employee and Community Education. So you're really the community that we serve. This is a large part of what we do is serving our mission, which is to provide vocational opportunities to people with disabilities as well as others who are experiencing barriers to employment. So this is part of our mission work, and I'm so happy that you have me here today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. This one. And then I will start my presentation. And let me know when you're able to see that, Grace.
Okay, I can see it. I get
Wonderful.
thumbs up from other people, so I think we're good to go.
Okay, great. So our topic today is resume essentials, and our objectives are first to discuss the purpose of a resume, identify your top skills that maybe you could list on a resume, and outline the 5 sections of your resume and really go over what should be the language in each section. So first, what is a resume? It's a one-page advertisement of your skills and experiences. So thinking about this as an introduction of yourself to a company that's looking to fill a position, and you are that person to advertise yourself and sell yourself for this position. So what does a resume do? It highlights key skills, it demonstrates why you're a good fit for the position. And why would we create this? To hopefully get an interview and then the job at the end of the interview process. So we have a lot of tips about how to get your resume seen, language that's going to help you get through a lot of the AI elements of the interview process. So we will, or of the application process. So we will get into all of that as we move along. So we are going to break down the resume into 5 main sections today. If you would like, we do have a free resume template for you. You are more than welcome to copy this link down and use it for later. It's a Google Docs template of a resume. And what I do encourage you to do, if you see that yellow
resume thing.
So if you see that highlighted at the top of the screen, it says stop, make a copy of this document or you will lose this work. We use this link with high schools across Oregon and Washington, with many different organizations. So please make a copy of this, because otherwise you're sharing your information with a lot of people who are not hiring for jobs. With this template, you can see on the right-hand side, there's a lot of comments on the right left by me for each section of the resume. This is going to mimic a lot of what I talk about today in our class, but you can always use those comments in the future as well to help guide your resume development. If anyone needs more time to write down that link, please let us know and we can give you a couple seconds.
Would you mind if I put it in the chat?
So, oh, sure.
Okay.
So what's important to note as we wait a couple more seconds is this is great to compile your master resume. So a master resume is really a collection of everything you have ever done that could possibly help you find a position. It's literally everything you've ever done. what our second class to this class is called Targeting Your Resume. So really looking at how to tailor your resume for a specific job. So that a lot of times relies on reading job descriptions to tailor your resume. But for today, we're focusing just on the master resume, thinking of every single experience, certification, degree, skills, everything you've ever done, and compiling it in one place. All right, unless anyone would like me to, okay,
think
sure.
that I got it wrong when I put it in the chat. Could you see the chat if that's correct? Because
I can't see it from here. Let me see if I can change my setups a little bit so I'm able to see you all. I am not able to see you all.
oh, that's okay. I'm trying it one more time.
Yeah.
https://bit.ly/3sp2arht.
That's correct, although I think they're forward slashes. I don't know
Oh,
if,
forward slashes. Yes, I have done forward slashes. Sorry.
okay, and that didn't
It's
work for you?
taking to something's wrong.
Oh, okay. Before the end of this session, I will make sure that you have a link that works. I'm not sure why it's not,
Okay.
but I will make sure that's in the chat. And
Thank
you definitely are all welcome to use that. Just make sure that you are creating a copy of it. And I actually might be able to do that now, but I do have to stop sharing for a moment.
Whatever's easy for you, Abigail. If you want to wait to the end, you know.
Okay. All right. Yeah, for whatever reason, it's hard for me to get back to Zoom. We don't use Zoom as much, so I'm not as proficient with it. Okay, so at the end, we'll make sure that you have a copy of the Google Docs template.
Thank you.
So, of course, yeah. We're going to break our resume into these different sections. The first is the heading of your resume. The next is qualifications, skills, whether they're soft or hard skills. We'll talk about the difference. Experiences that we've had, employment experiences, volunteer experiences, and always using action statements with them. And we'll talk about what that means and give you a whole list of ways to create those action statements. And then also including our education, certifications, any licenses you may have. And then another section at the end that sometimes we include is awards and achievements. So, but we'll go first into our heading. The heading of your resume should include all of this information. So your full name. So you can use a preferred name on your resume and maybe put your legal name in parentheses, but for a lot of people, a nickname is not professional for your resume. So you do want to make sure that you're using the name that you will be going by professionally in this context, but your legal name should be on your resume. It's really when you get to the HR process of being hired and setting up your employment where they really do need your legal name to be able to, file taxes for you. So then the next thing that should be on your resume is the city and state. And this is something that's definitely a change from older resume practices where, and I had this too for a long time, was your full address. So in the past that was great, but then we started realizing people are applying to 50 jobs, 100 jobs, maybe more. All of those people having your home address is not necessary. Again, this is when you start the hiring process, like you have been selected for this job and human resources needs your information and where to send your paycheck. That's when your home address is important. So for your resume, we really do encourage you just to have your full name and then the city and state that you live in. From there, including a phone number. and making sure that you set up a professional voicemail greeting, something like, "Thank you for calling Abigail Noreika. I am unable to get to the phone right now, but if you leave a message with your name and number and reason for calling, I'll get back to you as soon as I can." So making sure that it is professional greeting, and then that takes us into your email addresses. Also making sure that that name that you have is a professional email address. So something like I love cats 530 at gmail.com is not a professional email address. You want to make sure it's something resembling your name, because you really want to be able, when a hiring manager is looking at your resume, you want it to be something easy that corresponds to the name that's on your resume, something that's abigail.noreika12 at gmail.com, something like that, where it resembles your name. We also do encourage you to leave out any years that might identify, your age to someone. That could lead to ageism. So we do encourage you just leave that out. And then also encouraging you not to use school email addresses, because most likely you won't be a student at that school forever. So making sure it is one that you can, check in the future should you graduate. Any questions about the heading section of your resume?
I have a question. So
Mhm.
I'll work a lot with people who maybe are older and have like physical limitations due to their age, like maybe they're in their 80s or something. And you say not to like mention anything about their age, but I feel like if I don't, then as soon as they get to the interview, it's like they're just kind of dismissed. And so is
Okay.
there like a fine, is there like a line to be like, tell somebody like, hey, I guess like how much disclosure should you give? Or like I don't know. Cause like, I feel like if you
Well,
have physical limitations and you're older and then I apply for a job as like in a warehouse that's full time and requires a lot of like physicality, well,
right.
then that person's not going to get hired, but for that job, because they're immediately going to be dismissed, I feel like.
Right. So I think especially in the application and hiring process, that they're not allowed to ask you anything about what year you were born. That is what leads to ageism, and they're illegal, and it's not okay. If you're able to perform the job and you meet all the qualifications and requirements of that job, um, your age absolutely shouldn't matter. So I would say, like, until you get to HR and they're asking you like, okay, what year did you graduate high school? What year did you, finish this position? That's when maybe years would come into it. But really prior to that, that would be discriminatory to make decisions based on your age. Does that kind of answer the question? Like, in the hiring process, um, it absolutely shouldn't make a difference, and they shouldn't have to be alerted to someone's age.
I've just found that people, I guess, who maybe have more physical limitations and are older and can only work part-time jobs, if I'm trying to help someone apply for those jobs in particular,
Yeah.
right? Or if they're heading, or if they're
Mhm.
in their cover letter when they're reaching out to those employers, I've found that they have a better chance of finding a sustainable job that will actually last them versus walking into something that maybe then is too much for them, or the job is just
Right.
too much for them, and then they're immediately dismissed 2 weeks later. So now they've spent, let's say, 4 weeks applying for this job, doing the training just to be fired because
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think individual circumstances, it's unfortunate and definitely a reality, but in hiring practices, they cannot make that uh, you know, judgment based on age. So I think for us on our resume, representing our skills and our qualifications is most important so that we can get around those biases to demonstrate that we are the best candidate for this job. Beyond that, I think just like highlighting in your cover letter the wealth of experiences that you have, where you've, spent a lot of time in this industry, you would be a valuable addition to this company, suggests that maybe you've had a longer career than others, but that would be the most that we recommend alluding to it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions before we continue to the next section?
We have a few comments about what you just discussed, but I think we can move on. And
Okay.
people can just view the comments that were made.
Okay, great. Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm unable to see your comments, but I'm happy at the end to take those comments or questions as well.
Okay.
So our next section of the resume is our qualifications, our skills section. So the way that we like to break this up is thinking about hard skills and soft skills. And if we look at the left-hand column, hard skills are things that I could give you a test for. Equipment operation. You can operate a forklift or you cannot operate a forklift. There's a license for it. Other languages are hard skills. So what I do like to caution people is as soon as you write down that you have Spanish proficiency, let's say, or any language proficiency, someone in the room who speaks that language probably is going to throw a little test your way to see how proficient you are. So cautioning that, having beginner level of whatever language or taking 2 years of French in high school, maybe you want to leave that off of your resume. But if you are proficient in those languages and you feel like you could conduct business in that language, by all means, definitely include that. That is a hard skill. Business writing skills are hard skills. Computer programs, for sure. You can work Adobe Photoshop or you don't know how to work Adobe Photoshop. Making sure that, if you've been working with Microsoft Office products like PowerPoint, like Word, like Excel, list that you are proficient in those programs. They're very hireable skills that people want to know about. Any specific trainings that you've had, if you're certified in CPR, first aid, AED, those are awesome skills to bring to any company. Any food handler's license, notary licensing, any of those, definitely include them. And money handling skills are also really in demand, so listing that on your resume if you have that experience as well. Questions about hard skills?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay, because we will move to soft skills. On the right-hand side, soft skills are not necessarily something I could give you a test and decide if you're good at this. You just kind of demonstrate it through your work. A lot of times we think about these as like almost personalities traits. So are you an active listener? Are you great with teamwork? Are you detail oriented, adaptable? Do you have superior time management skills or effective communication or organization skills? So these are not necessarily something that I could give you a test or teach you. These are more things that you inherently are good at. So all of these that are on here are some of the most hireable skills that employers are looking for. So if you have any of these, by all means include them. And what we do recommend in this skills section is to include 3 to 4 hard skills and maybe 3 to 4 soft skills. A great way to take advantage of the space on your resume is creating 2 columns. So maybe in one column, including whatever hard skills, you don't have to label them hard skills, just skills. And then in the other column, listing the soft skills that you have. Really important to take advantage of the space that you have available on your resumes. AI will read 2 columns on a resume. AI has a hard time reading 3 or more columns on a resume. So I do caution you to, if you're going to take that advice, limit yourself to 2 columns. I also really recommend, and you can change this on Microsoft Word resumes, you can change this on Google Docs resumes, but the margin sizes. So the margin, if you can see my mouse, is this space, this empty space on the side and at the bottom. You can change those margin sizes and make them smaller so that you're able to use more of the page. So that's one way to really try and give yourself the advantage of the space that you do have on your resume. So for skills, that's what we recommend doing. Any questions about skills before we move on to the next section of your resume?
Nothing.
I have one quick question, please.
Okay.
So you mentioned that there's AI that checks like 2 columns. But what do you mean by AI? Like before our resumes gets to the HR, does some kind of AI checks them before that, or how does it work?
Yeah. So have you ever completed a job application where you had to enter all of the same information that was on your resume into their application? It's like you fill in your name, you fill in the first place you worked, then the second place you worked. It's the same information that's on your resume. That means that most likely it's going through an AI, or it's some system is going to read it and determine, do you meet the qualifications, and will forward your resume on to the next step if you do, or otherwise it's just a quick, we're going to pass on this person. So a lot of times it's like filtering out at the first step, like, oh, this job requires a high school diploma and this person said that they didn't. Okay, then we're not going to forward this on to the hiring managers. So that's mostly what we mean for AI reading your resumes. If you've ever had to plug in the exact same information that's on your resume into their portals, most likely that's what's happening.
And then just a note on that, we actually have beat the applicant tracking bots. That was one of our GetAhead events we did last year. And you can go to the GetAhead tab on our website, and you can watch that video, and it might help you understand exactly what's going on out there in the cyber world, and how resumes are processed online.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah. Okay, so the next section of our resumes is the experience section. So we always want to list the most recent experience first, and then work backwards. So you always want to start with what you are doing most recently, or the most recent position that you had. So experience really can include anything that you've done, any employment experiences, any volunteer experiences, because they all demonstrate how you can contribute to an organization. You do want to make sure that you break down the descriptions of your experience into specifics. So saying that you, let's say you worked a food service job, and I served tables. That doesn't really tell me a lot about what you did there. But if you can tell me, if we move on to the next line, quantitatively served 20 tables in 3 hours, how many, how much you did some, that gives me a lot more understanding of what you're able to do, how you're able to use time in a certain job. And so you can do 20 tables in 3 hours here. Maybe in this position, maybe it's an office job, you could answer 20 calls in 3 hours, something like that, where they can read your resume and say, oh, I can see that you could manage this workflow. Maybe you'd be able to manage this workflow as well. So you want to make sure that when you're describing your experiences for each position, that you're starting all of these with an action word. So if you can think back to those grammar classes, these are verbs. So I'm going to show you some examples on the next slide, of how you can describe experiences. So the first bolded word is an action verb. utilized Microsoft Office, PowerPoint, Word, Excel daily to communicate with colleagues and clients. So daily, I have a good idea of how often you're doing this. Maybe you organized an event at that position. So for this person, they organized a food drive to support the local community. They prepared meals, created activities, and assured the safety of children from however age range. Or maybe you supervise children's activities for 20 6 to 8-year-olds, where you say how many that you were able to deliver a service to. You developed and maintained relationships with key clients in a different role, or you trained and mentored new team members, improving overall team performance. So all of these bolded words are action verbs about what you did in a role. Notice that none of them use the pronoun I. I utilized Microsoft Office. I organized. When your name is at the top of your resume, it's assumed that you're talking about yourself. So the next slide that I have for you is just a list of all these action verbs that you could use to describe your experiences, your employment experiences, volunteer experiences, to really get a detailed description of what you did there. And if you can, quantify those experiences. Tell me how many people you were able to help, how often you communicated with someone, how many cases did you handle at a job. So any of these verbs can tell me a lot about what you did. And then when you quantify that, when you put a number to it, how many, how often, how much you did something, that gives me a really good idea of how could you help me at my organization. So any questions about this list of action verbs? These are, if you Google action verbs for resumes, they will give you so many ideas of verbs that you can use. Another thing to key into for AI, when you're looking at a specific job description and the job description says that in this role, you will have to evaluate data. And you know, in the last job you had, you were responsible for evaluating, analyzing data. Use that word, use that verb. It's probably going to help you get past some of those AI boundaries, or they're trying to weed out people who don't have that experience, have not done any evaluating, haven't analyzed data. So using the verbs of the job description is also really helpful. Questions, because my next slides are to show you some examples of a very basic resume, employment experience, and then a more detailed one.
Nothing in the chat right now.
Cool. So on the left-hand side, if we're looking at, this is cashier experience, the first one is, I worked at a retail store for 6 months. Yes, it tells me how long, but the first question as a hiring manager that comes into my head is like, okay, well, when? And there's a lot of different roles at a retail store. So what did you actually do there? On the right-hand side, we have a detailed example. Okay, you were a cashier at Goodwill Industries of the Columbia Willamette. You assisted over 50 customers a day as a cashier handling transactions, and you assured customers' needs were met through active listening, patience, and clear communication. That tells me a lot more about what you did. It also tells me your role, where you were working at a retail store. It just gives me a lot more understanding of what your role was in that position. The next one is a volunteer experience, or another employment experience, excuse me. This person worked as an office assistant. That's a very basic description. On the right-hand side, they were an office assistant, maybe at Goodwill Industries of the Columbia Willamette, maybe somewhere else. But what did they do there? They organized the calendar, mail, and notes for the department. They communicated with visitors about facility information. They produced announcements and flyers for over 100 employees. So there's a lot more detail about what you did. It also can be really helpful once you start a position. Keep that job description. Use it to update your resume about what you were responsible for, what was expected of you. Your job description can really help you with your current resume as well. The next example I have is volunteer experience. So for this person, they helped at a food bank. Very basic, doesn't tell me a lot. But the detailed version was that they worked at the county food bank, they served hot meals to over 50 customers in a 4-hour span, and they provided engaging customer service to over 30 families. So using those action verbs and making sure that you're quantifying how often, how much you're doing something really tells me a lot more about your experiences and your abilities. Any questions before we move on to the next section of our resume?
There are a couple of questions. One is, are we able to talk about best practices using ChatGPT on resume writing? And what are your thoughts on that?
I would say that is definitely a class unto itself. I think with ChatGPT, it is great for inspiration and brainstorming, but 100% it needs to be read and reread and double checked to make sure that everything is accurate. I also think that it's not going to produce a resume in a standard resume format like the one that we've given you at the beginning. That's a very standard format. For ChatGPT, it's probably not going to produce something where you could just copy and paste onto a Word document or a Google Doc. So you really do have to have an active role in creating your own resume. But that being said, if you describe a role and you want some inspiration, like how can I describe this and quantify this, it can be really helpful for inspiration.
Yes, I
That's how
find
I
it helpful also, like to reword a sentence. I'll write a
Yeah.
sentence and I'm like, that doesn't sound right. So then I'll put my sentence in there and they'll, reorganize it or reword it better. And I'm like, oh, that sounds a lot better. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
And as long as you are double checking and proofreading it, it can be really, really helpful, but relying on it to do the work for you, not as helpful. It makes mistakes.
yes.
Any other questions?
Not at this
And-
time.
Okay, and again, at the end, I'm free to answer some more questions as well. Our next section that we are going to include is our education. So listing the degree, the school name, the degree you earned, and the city and state. I think a lot of people are leaving the dates that they graduated off of resumes off of resumes, unless it was within the last 5 or so years. Great, include the date that you graduated. But otherwise, that's going to be something that human resources, when you're filling out the application for that specific role and you're hired, and that information is useful then. But again, this is another case of, oh, you graduated high school in 1976. They could pass judgment on that. So we encourage you, leave it off. If they ask for it, great. But otherwise, it's not something that has to be on your resume, and including again just the city and state of the school that you attended. We also have, if you are currently in a program, to, instead of again listing the date, include expected graduation. So that can be just an estimate. It doesn't have to be entirely like, oh, it's this spring term of this year. It can be 2027 or something, expected graduation 2027, whatever it is. So for education, that's what we recommend. Any questions about this section?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay, yeah, that one's pretty straightforward. The last section that we have for you is any certifications, licenses, awards, achievements. Definitely, if you have your CDL, commercial driver's license, make sure that's on there. If you've taken accounting basics and it's a Google certification, include it. CPR, first aid, maybe you've had culinary arts training. We mentioned food handler's card, Microsoft Office, if you're a notary, if you have real estate training, anything that sets you apart from someone or shows, like, to me, that shows that you have commitment, you have achieved this, you definitely have the skills required to, earn this certification. That's a good sign for me as a hiring manager. Okay. Unless there are any questions, we'll move on to our last, well, I have like one more section for you, but for design tips, you want to make sure that it is attractive, that your heading stands out. So we talked about your name. You want to make sure that your name is easy to find, including the city and state, your phone number, your email address. If you have a LinkedIn or a portfolio website, maybe including that link in the heading, but this really does need to stand out. This is a very simple design. We have this example on the right, and that's what our template really looks like. Maybe not with the colors. If you do use color, I would say make sure you're keeping it to one color, and that if someone were to print out your resume in black and white, that the gray scale of that color would be light enough. So for example, if I printed out this resume on the right in black and white, this yellow is light enough that the gray will also be light enough and I'll be able to read this. But if this was like if this yellow was like a dark blue and I printed it out in black and white, I probably wouldn't be able to read your contact information. So always choosing a color, if you're going to use color, choosing a color that's light enough. If it prints out, it's in black and white, you can still read it. So you want to make sure that you're trying to stick to one page with clear sections. 2 pages is probably the max. A lot of people have a lot of experiences that do end up going on to a second page, and that's okay. But you do want to make sure that it's really easy to pick out each section of your resume. So it's very clear that this is the experience section, this is the education section. I don't have to search for this. You can also tell on this resume that we have as an example, it's a maximum of 2 columns. This is an example of, okay, they have split it into 2 columns. AI can do 2 columns. For whatever reason, if you go beyond 2 columns, it can struggle with that. So sticking to these 2 columns. You also want to make sure that you have an appealing font that's at least 11 point in size. We recommend a few of these: Calibri, Verdana, Arial. You want to make it really easy for someone to read. I'm someone who has to read a lot of resumes, and the second I see like script or whatever, like my eyes, it's hard for people to read fonts like that. So making sure you're selecting one that's easy to read. One thing that used to be fairly common on resumes and we don't recommend is including a picture. Again, this could lead to any amount of bias or discrimination for whatever reason, so leaving that out. It's very common for CVs, curriculum vitaes, which is far more commonly practiced in Europe. But in the United States, we use resumes and don't include pictures on resumes. Okay, so that's design tips. Any questions about that?
On the bottom where you have skills and language, you have like the bars. Is that just for a demonstration here, or?
Yeah, it's just for demonstration, and
Okay.
it's just whatever template we put on here. But yeah, I would list, so for myself, English native, Spanish intermediate, French intermediate, if I was going to describe myself. But if you have beginner level of any language, I would recommend leaving it off, because the first thing someone's going to do is probably test your proficiency in that language if they speak it. So if you do have intermediate or above, by all means include that on your resume. But otherwise, maybe leaving it off. Okay, so we do have a couple tools for you that I recommend. Grammarly is pretty well known. This will check for spelling. This will check for grammar, for clarity, plagiarism. It'll look for that. we have a tip for you to detect the bloat in your writing. So this is writing that is unnecessary, where you're using words that or phrases that you just don't need, and Hemingway will cut that out and look for ways to make your writing more direct, more clear. And then the last tool that we can recommend is Tone Analyzer, where it just looks for that professional writing, that tone of your business writing, and making sure that you're being as professional and direct and clear as possible. So a couple tools for you.
Yeah, Abigail, I have the Grammarly on my computer, so everything I type, it checks it. Is that how Hemingway and Tone Analyzer also works, or do you go to their website like ChatGPT?
Yeah, that would be, you go to Hemingway's an app, but like you can copy all of the language that's in your resume, paste it, it'll analyze it and say, oh, you could probably cut this out, or no, you're good, looks great. So it'll give you some advice on how to make your writing more concise and direct.
Great, thanks.
Cool. So for my side, that's all I really have. So we can really get into any questions, any comments, any ideas that maybe came up into the chat that I can't see, unfortunately.
Okay, well, Gus actually just has a question or statement thinking about the thing you were saying about preferred names, and also the ways that unconscious bias about ethnic names.
Yeah.
So I suppose I can clarify what I was thinking. Like, I was trying to think of a way to say it. So I work with folks who are, working on their resume, and like, if someone comes in with like a very not like stereotypical American name, like we know there have been all sorts of studies about like how Raheem is not going to get the same amount of like callbacks as Roger. Like, doesn't matter if either of those people are real, like they just don't get the same callbacks. And so I'm wondering, like, does Raheem using a preferred name in that sort of a space potentially like help them get past that?
I think you're right to bring up those studies where statistically would be less likely to be contacted. So to that person, I would say, listen, if this is something you're worried about and you are okay with using maybe an anglicized version of your name and putting that on your resume, so let's say Roger, whatever his last name, Raheem's last name is, in parentheses between Roger and his last name, putting Raheem, I think would that's what we would recommend that he do, because eventually he's going to have to use his legal name in the process. But I think at least having another name that he would use on there, if he does go by Roger, having that on there would be helpful. But again, legally they can't discriminate against that, but as you've mentioned, statistically they are. So my advice would be having the anglicized version, Roger, parentheses, Raheem, and then last name, would kind of satisfy both of those.
Yeah, I have a couple of people asking about getting this recording, and once we've got that processed, we will definitely share it with all the people present today. So just to answer that question that's out there.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Are you able to share your PowerPoint as well, Abigail, or not?
Unfortunately, I'm unable to.
Okay, that's fine.
But yeah,
Such,
happy to take questions.
Nola says just use the first initial and middle, and use a first initial and a middle initial with last name would perhaps get a candidate past the review stage when they might be eliminated otherwise. So I think she's talking about,
Yeah, so maybe in that case, like our last name, that's a good idea. It's unfortunate, but it is reality. And I think job seekers have to make that decision for themselves. And it's a tough position to be put in, unfortunately.
okay, and then someone's asking for that correct link. I think they might have to go.
Ah. Yes, so I'm going to stop sharing my link or stop sharing my screen. Okay. I am almost there. I apologize. My computer really doesn't like Zoom.
Well, could you just email it to me and then I can copy and paste it in? Would that be helpful?
I just got it and I did double check it. It should work. So
Okay, so it's in the chat right now, everyone.
and I do very much need, if you're going to use this, clicking on file, the menu drops down and then it says make a copy. Please make a copy, otherwise the whole world will have your information.
Good to know.
This one does work.
Okay, good.
The difference between it was this is a tiny URL and that one said it was a bit.ly. So in the
Interesting.
PowerPoint, that part
Yeah.
adjusted.
Yeah. Unfortunate, but glad we could correct that. And I do hope you all have luck with that and are able to make a copy and use it for your master resume with our advice today.
Thank you.
Of course.
We still have 10 minutes left here, so if anybody has any other questions about anything we've went over, or perhaps something else about a resume that you were inquisitive about, please take this time to unmute. And
So I have a question, Abigail. What do you think about functional resumes rather than chronological resumes?
I think they can be really helpful, especially if, for people where there's gaps of employment and time off, identifying what is the most relevant employment experience and highlighting that is really helpful if that's the situation you're in. I think standard people expect it to be sequential, but resumes are subjective. So what's best to highlight your skills and why you would be the best fit for this job is going to be the best way to do your resume. I'm getting a chance to go through some of these comments. Okay. Seems like we're all up to date in the chat. 2 new messages. What job search does Goodwill offer? Goodwill has Job Connection department for anyone who's interested in finding employment opportunities. They can help with resumes. You can walk in and work on computers and print out resumes there as well. So that's the job search offerings that we have at Goodwill. Yeah, thank you, Nola. Thank you, everyone, and good luck to you all.
And, feel free to reach out to me as well, anyone, if you have any more follow-up questions or just want someone to double check your resume after you've made it. I do resume reviews here at INCIGHT. It's always good to have a second set of hot eyes on documents to make sure there's no typos. And I know you stressed the quantitative numbers, but that is so important so that the recruiter can really grasp what your workload capacity is.
I was wondering if you have any additional advice for people without experience. A lot of the jobs I'm looking at require like 2 to 3 years of experience
Yeah,
in the tech field.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think that is really the opportunity on your resume to demonstrate how you've done those things in the past. So maybe you don't have formal employment experience. I'm not sure what part of tech you're into, but highlighting maybe the certifications that you've gotten to work towards earning that experience. So for example, if it's coding, maybe you've taken a coding class, but you haven't been formally employed to code. Something like that, where you can show how you've been working or using those skills in the past, be it in a volunteer capacity, an intern capacity, or just personal. If you have a portfolio
Right.
that
I mean, right now I just have the school experience.
So within your schooling experience, have you used those skills? Have you taken classes about the topic or the field?
Yeah, I have a computer science degree, so I could maybe
Yeah,
talk
I
about
think
the
it's really
projects I did in
highlighting
past
that.
classes.
I think it's, if you have any work samples that would demonstrate your proficiency of those skills, that would be really helpful. And if it's on like a website that you could cite and have them, that's a good way to demonstrate, hey, I have been doing this.
Okay. Would it be appropriate to ask to have my resume reviewed right now, or would that not be a good use of the time?
I think that's definitely something after the session.
Okay.
I know Grace as well and INCIGHT offer those services. We do as well at Goodwill. I think afterwards we can probably find someone who would be willing to do that.
Okay.
And so if you want to go ahead and you can send your resume to me, and I have my email in the chat. It's gracec@insight.org. Or like Abigail says, you can reach out directly to Goodwill. I know they have a whole department that's all they do is resume reviews, and someone there could help you as well.
Yeah. And that's Job Connection.
Job Connection.
Yeah. No worries. And we do a lot of events with Grace frequently, but all over Oregon and Washington, where we go to job fairs and provide resume reviews, and provide this advice as well.
Yes, absolutely. And even our upcoming job fair, October 22nd, Abigail will have a team of educators there that will do on the spot resume reviews.
I know we have one comment that says they don't see Grace's email in the chat.
Okay, I can put it in there again.
Thank you.
Oh, I know what happened. I didn't do it to everyone. That'll do it. I just answered someone's question, and
there we go.
And then you should have received an email anyways with this link for the Zoom event, and that was sent from the same email address. So it should be in your inbox already, but gracec@insight, and that's with a C, not an S, .org. All right, well, if we don't have any more questions, I just definitely want to thank Abigail for taking this time, sharing her presentation and helping us kind of get a clear picture of what we need to do to make our resume a stronger document that speaks more to, you know, who we are and what we're capable of doing. So thank you so much. Thank you for the job seekers. I see majority of them have left already, but those that have endured to the end, good for you. Thank you so much. Hope to see you at the upcoming job fair if you haven't found employment. And as I said, you know, please reach out to me if you have any other questions or comments. So everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Hey, quick
Abigail,
que-
this was really great.
Yeah. Quick question for
Oh,
you,
good.
Abigail. When you
Sure.
had your presentation, you had the closed caption on the bottom. So what do you guys use for that?
That is purely PowerPoint.
Really?
Yeah. So let me see. When
Is
you go into
PowerPoint-
presentation,
Is PowerPoint generating it for you on the spot?